Now, the energy crisis continues to harm the ailing economy. Steel and Engineering Federation, Seifsa, has conducted a Blackouts impact assessment in the metals and engineering sector. Seifsa claims some job losses are response to the electricity crisis and that the crisis is the most prevalent economic risk. For more, I'm now joined by Seifsa's Chief Operating Officer, Tafadzwa Chibanguza. Thank you so much, Tafadzwa, for joining us this evening. Now, production in the sector is expected to contract by 2.2% this year. And unfortunately, employment in the sector will also contract by 1.1%, if I'm not mistaken. Some very concerning trends. Are these losses mostly attributed to companies responding, of course, to load shedding and the energy crisis?
Yeah, good evening. Thanks for having us. In essence, yes. I mean, right now we've historically made the point that the energy crisis is the most binding constraint faced by the sector. You have to understand that the steel and engineering value chain is in essence the heartland of the industrial base, and to that, electricity is a very important input to the sustainable functioning of the operations in that value chain. So we represent everything in steel and engineering. So in that environment, then naturally the energy crisis is a considerable risk to the supply, and to the operations of the organization. So in that sense, what we then did was we commissioned the work to analyze what is the impact of the energy blackouts on the value chain, and we measured it across employment, investment, and what it's doing to input costs, and also just to get a sense of where the investment into alternative energy solutions are. I'll be happy to unpack all of those, but in essence, a lot of it points to the numbers that you already mentioned. Employment declining 1.1%, production, our base case scenario is for a reduction of 2.5% for the calendar year 2023. But when we factor in the results of this survey, that number also does turn quite bleak, worse than the 2.5% that we tabled.
Let's talk about one of those points you might have just mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, investment. How badly is this for especially foreign investment as well as local investment?
Yeah. So it's a mix of investment, local and domestic, as you correctly say. These are already firms operating domestically. So the question that we put out in the survey was, has the current crisis and the threat of electricity supply led you to cancel or defer any investment? And the answer to that was a resounding yes. And I must just make a point that this survey, this sample, 206 companies responded, who represent, in terms of employment, about 10% of the sector. So just from that sample size, they've indicated that they have cancelled investments to the tune of 2.6 billion rand. And in there, it's across all spectrums of greenfield, brownfield, and sustaining capital investment. But the number is 2.6 billion rand that has been cancelled in investment plans, which is a considerable amount, considering the fact that since 2008, investment patterns, investment trends into the sector have actually been on a contracting direction. So it is a considerable outcome in terms of what we are seeing in the survey results.
Now, we've seen the headlines about President Cyril Ramaphosa saying, infrastructure ambitions could save South Africa's ailing steel sector. Now, you as Seifsa, you are direct beneficiaries of the government's infrastructure project and their promise, of course, to invest billions. How's that going? Because if I'm not mistaken, the government said that they will make an initial investment of 1.8 billion in bulk infrastructure.
Yeah. So you're correct in identifying that we are direct recipients of that activity by virtue of the fact that we represent the entire steel and engineering value chain. So construction is a major sector that we supply into. Looking at the trends and the immediate trends, you can imagine these are fairly recent plans that have been announced by the president, and they have to go through a long process of approvals and the rest. But we are not seeing an uptick in activity as a result of what you would call expansion investment. That's new project investment. right? That we're not seeing. In fact, even in our forecast for this year, that 2.2% contraction, we do build in quite some punitive numbers around what we are seeing in terms of infrastructure spend, right? So it's one thing to have promises, it's another thing to have them starting to roll out. So the short answer, the long answer that I've taken to answer your question is that no, we're not seeing it to the extent that we would like to. And most of the investment that we are seeing into the economy, but from the sector that we supply into, is what you would call investment in sustaining capital, so machinery and equipment and the rest. And that's really what's been driving investment. But what we need from a long-term perspective is the type of investment you are describing: heavy infrastructure, long-term, greenfield, and that will really drive trends in the sector.
Now, of course, would you say that it's important that government's industrial policy, when it comes to this industry, should hinge to local and international trends instead, because this is, of course, very important for the industry to be running smoothly but also sustainably?
My apologies, I seem to have lost you there during the first part of your question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course. Just basically talking about, local and international trends. Should government policy definitely look at that going forward?
Yeah, I'm not too sure what's happening. I've got a very bad line on my end, and I'm only catching very bad, very at the end of your question. My apologies.
Oh no, that's perfectly fine. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. If you can hear me.
Okay, right. Just basically asking, when we take a look at international and local trends, should South African government policy also take a look at those trends for them to then be able to have this sustainable structure in place for the industry?
Definitely. And remember, the choice to deploy a large-scale infrastructure program that our sector would be beneficiaries of is a domestic decision. We are recipients, or we are victims or beneficiaries of what happens internationally in terms of good or bad developments that happen, and I'm talking economic developments. But domestically, that is in our policy realm, or policy toolbox, if you like, to decide to roll out a massive infrastructure program. So it's good and well to replicate what international peers are doing in terms of their rollout of infrastructure development, but really that's a domestic choice, and that's really, we look to the state then there to make those choices, shift away from a consumption type of spend in terms of the budget and allocation from the social side, and have it really in the economic development side. And again, like I said, that's a domestic policy choice. But it's all good and well to take best practices from international peers.
And Tafadzwa, just very lastly, we do have a new Minister of Electricity now, Nzora Makgopa, and the government, it seems like there is a plan in place now for the energy crisis to be resolved. What's your take on that, and what's your outlook?
Look, what we're on record for is we need a resolution. And this resolution, to the extent that now it has attention all the way up to the highest office in the land, with the minister reporting straight into the presidency, is welcome. Because again, apart from just our sector, the energy crisis presents, as we've said repeatedly, a significant risk to the economic prospects. We've seen social unrest coming out as a result of the energy crisis, and many other areas in which electricity powers the economy, if you like. So the extent that we've seen now dedicated focus in the form of a minister, to the extent that that gets things going, we will support the minister in every way we can. In fact, we put it on record that given the expertise residing in our sector, where we can make effort to assist the minister, we will definitely be happy to do so. and all we can do is offer from our end. And now hope that the trends that we're already seeing, to the extent that they can be sustained in terms of lower levels of load shedding, only persist. But from us, the offer is to assist wherever we can as industry.
Thank you so much, Tafadzwa Chibanguza, COO at Seifsa, for that on the energy crisis, how it's impacting the engineering and, of course, metal industry.